Welcome to Power Fueled Living. I'm your host, Lisa Hooks. Thank you for joining me today. And of course, I am excited about this show. Today, I have Michelle Moore with me, and we're going to discuss abandonment to forgiveness. Stay tuned.
To fulfill your life, living out your passions with all fuel life. Power fuel living, power fuel living.
Michelle, thank you for joining me.
Thanks
I am
for having
so glad to have you here. Now, you are an award-winning author and speaker. Let's start with that. Tell me about that.
Well, yes, I am an award-winning author. I wrote a book called Selling Simplified, 55 Fast Tips to Jumpstart Your Real Estate Business, and it earned an international award in business and finance books, and I'm very proud of it. But I also, of course, wrote Abandonment to Forgiveness, and I speak and I teach and I do all kinds of stuff.
Well, I'm excited about having you here. You have accomplished a great many things, and so that's wonderful.
Thank you.
But starting with your book, Abandonment to Forgiveness.
Yes.
This is a story of you being abandoned as a child. I can't imagine that. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so kind of the Cliff Notes version is by the time I was 5, my parents had married and divorced twice, and while 14, my mother vanished, and I had not seen my father in that 5 to 14 and a half years old, that 9.5 year period. I'd seen him one time. And so when my mother vanished, it was one of those things where, you know, my father didn't want me, my mother was gone, and I was an only child, and so, you know, it really wreaked havoc. You know, like I look back sometimes and I think, man, at 14 and a half, you know, how did I live through it?
Yeah.
You know?
What were you thinking about that situation?
Well, at the time it was, initially I thought, well, it'll be any time now my mother will be back for me. We were very close. I was, you know, like I said, I was an only child, and she was my best friend, and, you know, like I said, we were very close. And so, you know, I think initially it was she'll be back any time, and then reality started setting in after a few months, and I was living with an aunt and uncle who were really just emotionally not there for me. A little bit verbal, I would say quite verbally abusive, and just, you know, just not there for me in a supportive way in any way. And so I look back now and I think, how in the world did I do it?
Yeah, and I want to know that answer to that question. How did you do it? Because you didn't have your parents, then you had guardians who were not connecting with you in a parental loving way. Yeah. So how did you deal with it?
I think I survived. I look back now a little bit in hindsight, and I say I really do attribute some of it, a small, you know, a good portion, but on my personality. You know, my personality is naturally on the DISC profile. I'm a D, which is a driver, and I do know that there were times in my life that I really was holding on, you know, to just trying to do the right things and make the right decisions just by my fingernails. You know, it just felt like I was just dangling and holding on, you know, with just everything I had, just fighting through. I remember in counseling when I was, I guess, about 30 years old, I remember the counselor looked at me one day and said, you do realize, like, you should be drug addicted, have an alcohol issue, you should have 5 kids by 5 different men, you know.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, this is not normal. I deal with people all the time with drug addictions and different kinds of addictions. And he said, you know, with your background, you know, what your life is today, it does not look like what it really should be, statistically speaking.
Right, right.
And so I think, you know, God was just really protecting me in some situations looking back. And you know, as time came on, I began to know the Lord. You know, I was raised that there were 2 things that you didn't talk about growing up. I was raised you didn't discuss politics and you didn't discuss religion.
Okay.
So in my early 20s, I knew nothing about the Lord. I didn't know if he was related to Jesus. I didn't know what the rainbow meant. I didn't know the story of Noah's Ark. I knew nothing. And I mean, I was a complete blank slate.
You know, let's stop there for a minute, because it's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of times we assume that everybody has heard of Jesus. Everybody knows something about God. You know, even as Christians, there's this assumption that, okay, well, you do know who I'm talking about, but you're saying here you knew nothing.
No, no.
Wow. At what age? 20?
Well, even into my 20s, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And during your adolescence, you know, that's a tricky time for us, right? So we have all of these emotions, feelings, you know, whether we belong to some type of group, you know, you have your tribalism, you know, and you want to fit in. How were you dealing with that, with the knowledge that you were abandoned?
Yeah, so I was abandoned, and then also I didn't fit in. I was alone. I remember eating lunch. You know, just recently I recalled that I would eat lunch by myself. I had come in the middle of the school year. People already had their own friends. And so I really went through a time where I really had no friends. I would come home, and really in a lot of ways that was a living hell. And then, you know, not knowing if my mother was dead or alive was a living hell. And so, and she was missing for almost 18 years.
My.
And so she changed her identity back when, you know, this was so many years ago, so this was before identity theft, but she had stolen someone's identity, and she changed her name, took on this other person's identity, and so it was like as though she had just fallen off the face of the earth. And I was just unable to find her. I had done so many things through the years, crazy things, and just couldn't find her.
So you found the Lord and received salvation. So how did that help you along?
Yeah, so I did not recognize that forgiveness was what I really was struggling with. I didn't even see it as that. But what I did know is that I was still yearning for, you know, my parents. And, you know, I would literally be in my, I would come out, and my husband and I would, you know, have these, you know, open on Christmas morning, open the Christmas gifts and all that kind of good stuff. And then I would go in my bedroom, and, you know, my husband would find me in there crying. And to me, it was another holiday. It was another thing. Like, birthdays were never happy for me. I knew I was struggling, and one night I was sitting on my sofa, and my husband and I were talking. I was crying. I was very inconsolable over something that was doing with some family, my father. And I was just crying because I wasn't being treated like family with my own family. And I was just not being included. I had had a life of not being included. And so I was crying, and my husband, being the funny, you know, he wasn't trying to be funny, but he's like, well, the way I see it, they're doing you a favor, you know. But he had gotten up to leave the room to go do something, and I sat there, and I was crying. I was sitting on the sofa, and all of a sudden I heard, you are not even grateful for what you have.
Oh my.
And then I had 3 visions, and the first vision was my home, and the Lord reminded me that I had prayed for that home. And the second vision was my husband, and the Lord showed me, you know, many of my girlfriends and even a couple of family members have not found the love of their life, and here you are, you have this man that, you know, treats you great and all of this and provides. And then the third vision was about my children in the NICU unit. They had both been born premature, and I had been sent home without them. They were both in the NICU unit for quite a few days. And I could hear them laughing and giggling in the room next to us on the Wii. They were playing on the Wii. And you know, they're happy and healthy and completely. And he was showing me all these things, you know, he had done for me.
Yeah.
And I was like, grateful. And that's, you know, and I was defiant in that moment. And it was like as though I came out of myself and could see myself sitting on the sofa. And I remember thinking, what am I doing? I've been doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And odds are my parents aren't sitting on their couches or their sofas in their living rooms right now crying over what they had missed or hadn't done. And I thought, I was just disgusted with myself all of a sudden. And I remember saying, something's got to change. And I didn't know what it was, but I say that it was the beginning. From that night, with it immediately began a number of things. It set in motion a number of steps where God healed me.
Awesome.
And I say He led me down the path marked forgiveness. And so I had a vision one day, and it was about a year later, and it was of a table, like a kitchen table. And it was rectangular, and it had the 4 legs. And what God showed me was that there's those 4 legs. You know how a table is. If one leg is short, how it doesn't really do right. And it wobbles, and it's made to be sturdy and provide a surface for us, right? And so when it operates right. And so what He showed me was that there are 4 legs to forgiveness. And so the first leg is just, really gratitude. Being grateful for what we have. If you don't have enough, then how can you ever forgive? It's like the gratitude really does play a part in this for me. And so a couple of months later, it was raining outside, and I went out. I have this big covered back porch, and I come outside and I looked out, and the biggest beautiful raindrops were falling. And I remember crying, and I thought, what in the world is going on with me? I was just so grateful that it was raining.
Yeah.
And I thought, what is going on with me? Like, I've never liked rain. And just so many things came to my mind, and God was reminding me of all these things and what rain does. And I just thought, whew, something is crazy happening here.
What's going on?
So then I woke up one morning, and God was like, Grace, look it up in the dictionary. And I started asking people, and I started searching out, what is grace? And then I started searching out. One day I woke up, and it was like mercy. So I started looking at mercy. The Bible says grace, my grace is sufficient. And I think that in a lot of ways mercy is about, and grace can be about, perhaps. See, what that part of the journey did was allowed me to say perhaps. And so perhaps my mother thought she was doing the right thing. Perhaps she left me because she thought she was leaving me for a better life. She was going to leave me behind because it was better for me. Perhaps my father, just thought that maybe it would just be more peaceful to not deal with my grandparents and my mother or whatever, and just, didn't come and visit me. And so perhaps, just perhaps.
Yeah.
Where there was never a perhaps before. I would meet women who didn't have custody of their children, and I immediately, judged that and was like, well, no, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. I don't even want to hear it. That's how I would react.
Yeah,
I would say,
that wound, you were speaking out of your wound.
Yeah, and I would be like, I don't even want to hear it. There is no reason good enough. That's what, I said those things. And I wasn't going to hear it. I wasn't going to have it, wasn't going to listen to it, didn't matter. And there were times in my life, that I had those opportunities to hear what was going on with someone, but I didn't need to hear it, And then the fourth was forgiveness. And when I forgave my parents, I remember having a vision, and me and my visions, and I had a vision, and there was a fork in the road. And the fork was, I sensed God was to the left of the fork, just a step in. And to the right was really the continuation of the path I'd been on. And I thought, the world would tell me, because believe you me, I've had so many people tell me, I wouldn't pay for a plane ticket to, fly your mother out here. And I did. And I did all these things. And so, but what God did was, with that fork in the path, what it was is letting go of the right to be upset, letting go of being hurt, letting go of being right, letting go of all of the things that had been done wrong, and letting go really of even grieving for what had been stolen from me. Because when my husband found me in the bedroom, that's what I was doing. I was grieving for what had been stolen. I was still wanting to be that child.
Yeah.
My husband said, you'll never be a child with your parents. And it was just an eye-opening conversation we had, and I realized that I was still really wanting that. And I realized, he said, Michelle, you grow and your relationship with your parents change. See, I hadn't had any of that evolution.
No, you haven't.
So I was still stuck.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, I feel like in a lot of ways I've outgrown my parents. And I said, what do you mean? And he was explaining to me, you know, well, you go through this thing where they're your friends, and then, you know, they kind of fall a little bit behind, and then you know, you help them. And, you know, I feel like I'm starting that stage with my parents. And he started explaining all these things. And
Wow, that
and
sounds
so it
like
was a
wisdom
lot.
from God.
Yeah, and so he
Yeah.
was explaining all that to me, and it was like, oh, I think I have been thinking, like, you know, I'm grieving for my childhood, thinking one day I'm going to have that. Like, they're just going to walk into my life and they're going to be my child, my parent, and I'm going to be the child. I'm a grown woman with kids.
Right.
And so, so I let it go. I thought, you know what, my way isn't working. And God, you know, it didn't really matter what everybody in the world would think.
That's right.
It
That's
didn't,
right.
because the world would tell you, yes, oh, hold on to that grief. You were done wrong. This was done to you.
Anger, bitterness, yeah, keep it going, keep it
Well,
strong.
yeah, because it was
Yeah.
justified. You
Yeah,
know, she
right.
should have never left you. I
Yeah.
wouldn't give her the time of day. I've heard it all. And so I thought, but that's not what we're called to do. So many times, you know, Christians think that forgiveness is a choice. And it just isn't.
It's not.
It's a command.
It is.
And when I had that revelation one day, I thought, oh my goodness, we're getting it all wrong. And, you know, I thought, and it's the only thing in the Bible that I'm aware of that says, you know, if you have unforgiveness, don't even tithe to the church until you go and make it right. And then come back and tithe.
Right.
It's the only thing that comes between you and tithing,
Yeah.
even. And I believe absolutely, not only does it change your life, you know, people think they hold on to unforgiveness and we hurt, we you know, nurture. I have a friend who says they pet the kitty. You know, I have this cat, it's like this cat and you just keep petting it. It's this wound and you just keep carrying it around like a kitty and you keep petting it. And I just thought, you know, I was innocently, you know, never wanted to be a victim. It was nothing like that. I was just grieving for what had been stolen. And I wasn't accepting, you know, that I wasn't ever going to be the child that had the parents who adored them and wanted to be in their lives.
Yeah.
And I just had to accept that. And I remember when I became a Christian, it took me a year to wrap my head around calling God my Father.
Yeah.
Because that was not a good
That's
thing
very
for me.
difficult. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was very hard for me.
Parent wounds
Yeah.
can create that difficulty. I experienced the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, he was, for a long time, he was God. And then as I began to heal from my own trauma, then he became Heavenly Father, Father, Abba Daddy. So there
Yes.
was a transition that had to take place.
Yes.
So I'm assuming then that you were able to reconcile with your mom.
Yeah, so she called. Dylan was 5 months old, my oldest child, who's now just turned 14. And she needed money. She had lost her job. And
So how was she able to find you?
she had a friend who turned out used to be a skip tracer. And so he had a computer and he knew how to find people. So she had given an uncle's name and an aunt, and then she finally gave my name because she couldn't find them. And I had been in the media.
Okay.
And so, and this was quite a few years ago, so this was before the internet was really what it was, but I had been in the Tennessean newspaper, and the Tennessean was online. And then I had been on the news, and there was a gentleman who was with the Doe Network, who worked with police departments throughout the United States. The Doe Network is in Jane Doe and John Doe. He had seen me on the news and saw I was searching for a mother that had been missing. And they had a Jane Doe in Washington State that they wanted my mother's dental records. And when they were able to decide that that was not my mother, then they were able to start a website, which, you know, again, this was not what
Right.
it was back, you know,
Yeah.
back then it was different. And so it was a big deal to have a website. And so, they had a guy who was an age progressionist who worked with the police department who volunteered his time. And so they created a web page on his website, and the gentleman found that and found the Tennessean article. And the Tennessean article had some photos and, of course, my story and, of course, the website. And so the gentleman, you know, knew my mother as a completely different name.
Wow.
And so he comes over and says, you know, this woman that you gave me this name, she's looking for a mother. And the mother's been missing for nearly 18 years. And he said, you know, the interesting thing here is this mother of hers looks just like you. And so he told her that if this was her, you know, side of the story, that he told her that if you don't call her, I will. And so she called, and I flew her out the next day. I needed to see her. And, you know, we had been so close. I'd always just assumed that we would be close. But she really wasn't looking for a relationship. She just needed some help. And so it didn't work out that way. And then a few years ago, she passed away. And so.
So how did you reconcile that meeting and her not wanting a relationship?
Well, I did the same thing with my father.
Okay.
Actually, an interesting thing is I did that first with my mother, and then I
Okay.
had to accept and realize that my father was the same. What I ended up having to realize was they didn't want to be my mother, so why would they want to be my children's grandparents?
Okay.
And for me, you know, I thought, oh, my mother's going to just be thrilled to find out she's a grandparent. She was here for 2 days. And she held Dylan for maybe all of about maybe a minute, and really wasn't interested. You could just tell. And in fact, it was so awkward. My aunt came over and was like, "Here, let me hold him," and you know, but it was real obvious. And so, you know, I just had to accept that.
Okay.
You know, some things you just
So
have
you
to
just
say,
took
okay.
things at face value and said, this is how
Yeah.
it is, and I need to deal with it and accept it.
Well, what I learned was, and this is a very valuable lesson for me, and probably, hopefully, for anybody else listening, is that, you know, I had always wondered and always thought that the saying, "It is what it is," was just such a cop out. I'm such a, you know, things can be better and work hard, and I'm driven. You know, I'm that D I was talking about. And what I realized was some things you just can't change. And they are, just let them be. Just accept them for what they are. And
That's a very powerful statement, Michelle.
Yeah.
What people need to hear.
Yeah.
Some things just can't change. There are things that we can't fix.
Yeah.
Things that are unfixable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She had the choice. My
Yeah.
father had the choice. So it was one of those things where you just have to accept it. And I realized I wasn't willing to deal with reality. And I just, again, that you can always be better. And if I remember that same counselor that said, do you realize, the same counselor said, hey, I'm going to describe something to you, and I want to ask you if you think this might be you. I said, oh, okay, sure. And he says, shuffle, 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 please, somebody, please, someone, hey, do you love me now? Oh, well, shuffle, 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 shuffle. What about now? Do you love me now? And shuffle, shuffle. And I looked at him, and he gets done. He goes, what do you think? You think that could be you? And I was like, no. And I look back now and laugh because, boy,
That
was he
was
right.
exactly you.
But I just didn't see it. But I
Right.
had spent my whole life trying to be perfect enough, good enough, successful enough to really just, not only with my father and all of that, but I think really I tried to show that I was worthy. I was worth something,
Yeah,
even in my
yeah.
jobs, and I've earned over 40 sales awards and leadership awards in my career, and a lot of it was trying to prove to somebody, because I knew I had it in me. I just had to, you know, if I worked hard enough, if I did this or if I did that. And what happened was I was trying to prove to other people that I was worthy. And so I got a great story. So I went through this whole forgiveness thing, and you know, it was great, and God really revealed some things to me, humbled me in some ways, and you know, and so it was great, and had me apologize to a family member who I told nobody I was going to apologize to, because I knew my husband, my friends would say, have you lost your mind? But what God showed me was, you know, I call you to go to bed and lay your head on the pillow at night with nothing between you and someone else. And you did that. And now you know better, and I expect you to do better. And I want you to go, and I want you to go apologize. And so I did. And I meant every word of it. And it was great. And it didn't matter what had been done to me. It wasn't about that. And it wasn't about justifying anything. It didn't matter. It was what it was. And so a few months later, that was really the end of the forgiveness walk in a lot of ways. And one day I was walking through my family room a few months later, and I heard God say, now I can use you.
Mm.
And I thought, what does that mean? Since then, I've become an author and do the TV and all that. But then what happened was a few months later, I was standing in my office at home. I have an office, and my kids were outside playing or, and running around. I could hear them laughing. And I thought, what is this feeling I'm feeling? What is this feeling? What is this feeling? What is this feeling? And I was literally standing in the middle of my office, and I was just like, what is this feeling? And I realized it was joy. I don't know that I had ever felt joy. And so forgiving those hurts, forgiving my parents, it changed my life. It didn't change anything about theirs.
Right.
But it changed everything about mine.
Oh, do that. As we're wrapping up, Michelle, what would you say to people who have experienced abandonment and they have not accepted it or they have not healed from it? What would you say to them?
I would say the first thing is accepting it. Where abandonment comes in so many different forms. When I began speaking, I started realizing it could be just an emotional. I remember that Reba McEntire song where she says, "The greatest man I never knew," really is talking about that. She's saying, this man that read the newspaper and I saw every morning at the kitchen table, I didn't know. You can be so removed from somebody that you're emotionally abandoning them. It can be a spouse that leaves somebody. And so there are so many stories of abandonment in so many different ways, so many hurting people still. And I would say the best thing you can do is give it to Jesus. And when I took that left path at that fork in the road, I did that in faith and said, what I'm doing is not working. And I'm going to completely surrender. I don't care what the world says. I don't care. I'm going to just, you said this is the way to go, and so I'm going to do this. And you can't take a different path without faith. And faith is dead without works, right?
That's right.
But you do have to have the faith of at least the size of a mustard seed. And I had mustered that up.
Okay.
And said, I'm giving this to you. And I'm
And you experienced
done.
the fruit from it.
Yes. It was the best decision I ever made.
Amen
Other
to
than
that.
being, of course, saved. But
Yeah.
it's just obedience is greater than sacrifice is
Yes,
what
it
the Bible
is.
says. And God is just looking for us to obey. He's looking for us to trust Him and love Him and put it in His hands.
Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show.
you for
You're
having me.
just so rich in experience and wisdom, and I would love to have you back. Thank you for sharing your story, your book. And as we finish up, what is the last thing, that fuel point, that you would want to say to our viewers?
I would say make sure that you forgive anybody that's hurt you. That it's the best decision that you can do is because you forgive people for yourself, not for others. We think it's like a ransom that's to be held, and we want them to earn it or change their behavior or whatever. Act like they're sorry, say they're sorry. No.
Well, thank you for viewing Power Fueled Living. Stay tuned next week for another great episode.
Finding a purpose to fulfill your life. Living out your passions with